It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning in a massive distribution centre on the edge of town. Forklifts hummed through the aisles, pallets stacked like towers, and the faint smell of coffee mixed with the sharp chill of refrigerated air. But beneath the fluorescent lights, tension was heavy. A multi-million-dollar shipment of frozen goods was on the line, and the cooling system that kept everything safe had been down for days. Managers in pressed suits stood in a tight circle, whispering in frustration. Contractors had come and gone, each one leaving behind bigger invoices and no real answers. If the problem wasn't solved soon, the company risked losing its biggest client. People were already talking about layoffs, about what would happen if trucks rolled up to find spoiled cargo. And that's when he walked in. Wearing a faded work shirt and boots that had seen better days, Michael Carter pushed a mop bucket along the polished concrete floor. To most, he was invisible. Just the maintenance guy who showed up when pipes leaked or when someone spilled coffee in the break room. A single dad in his mid-30s, tired eyes but steady hands, just trying to make ends meet for his little boy at home. Michael paused for a moment, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. His eyes drifted toward the group of managers and the silent, humming freezer units behind them. Something about the sound wasn't right. He tilted his head, listening, not as a janitor, but as someone who had spent years fixing old appliances in cramped apartments, doing whatever it took to save money after his wife passed. No one noticed him standing there, not yet. But in just a few moments, the man they overlooked every day would see what no consultant had, and what he did next would ripple far beyond the cold air of that warehouse. Michael kept pushing the mop, though his mind was far from the polished floor. He had learned long ago how to stay invisible, how to blend into the background. People rarely looked twice at the guy with a name tag that read maintenance. But while others saw broken machines as someone else's problem, Michael had never been able to switch off that part of him that wanted to fix things. He slowed near the freezer units, pretending to rearrange his cleaning supplies. The managers were too busy arguing to notice. One insisted on calling another contractor. Another muttered about shutting the whole section down until further notice. Every word carried the weight of money slipping away, of jobs hanging by a thread. Michael crouched down, listening to the steady hum of the cooling system. Beneath the drone, he heard a faint rattle, sharp and uneven, the kind that told him the problem wasn't where everyone had been looking. It wasn't the new equipment, but something older, tucked away, something overlooked. A memory flashed across his mind. His wife, years ago, laughing at him in their tiny kitchen while he pulled apart an old refrigerator they had bought second-hand. The thing had rattled and clanked so loudly their neighbours complained, but Michael fixed it with nothing more than a screwdriver and stubborn determination. He remembered the pride on her face, how she kissed his cheek and told him, "You always find a way, Mike." The sound in the warehouse was the same. He felt his heart thump, not from fear, but from recognition. He knew what was wrong, and he knew he could fix it. But stepping forward meant drawing attention. It meant breaking the unspoken rule that people like him, maintenance guys in worn boots, were supposed to stay in the background, not tell executives how to run their business. Still, he couldn't shake the thought of his little boy waiting at home, depending on him. He couldn't shake his wife's words. Michael gripped the handle of his mop tighter. He had a choice to make. Michael set the mop aside, his palms damp from more than just the work. For a long moment he simply stood there, weighing whether to walk away like he always had. Nobody ever got fired for keeping their head down. But people did lose their jobs when a company failed. One of the managers raised his voice, frustration spilling into the air. "We've already lost 3 days on this. If that shipment doesn't leave tomorrow, the client pulls out." His tie was crooked, his forehead slick with stress. Another manager muttered something about losses and accountability, and the circle grew tighter, their voices sharp but helpless. Michael's chest tightened. He had felt that same desperation before, not in boardrooms but in grocery aisles, standing with an empty wallet while his son pointed to a box of cereal. He knew what it was like when the numbers didn't add up, when something small could tip your whole world over. And now he heard that same kind of fear echoing in the voices of people who usually looked untouchable. The rattle inside the cooling system grew louder, almost taunting him. He glanced around. No one had noticed. To them, he was just part of the background, a blur in grey clothes, invisible. But in his mind, he saw his boy's drawing taped to the fridge at home, 2 stick figures holding hands, with the words "me and Dad" scrawled across the top. That little drawing reminded him every day that his son didn't need him to be invisible. He needed him to stand up. Michael cleared his throat softly, almost testing if his voice still worked. "Excuse me," he said, careful but steady. Heads turned. The circle of managers looked at him with a mix of annoyance and confusion, as if surprised the janitor could even speak. One of them frowned, already dismissing him with a glance. But Michael didn't back down. His heart raced, yet his words came out plain and steady, the way his wife once told him to speak when he truly believed in something. "I think I know what's wrong." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The hum of the broken cooling unit filled the gap where no one spoke. Then one of the managers, a tall man with a crisp white shirt and a voice that carried more impatience than patience, gave a quick laugh. "You think you know what's wrong?" he said, the words wrapped in disbelief. "Look, this isn't a leaky faucet. We've had licensed contractors here all week. So unless you've got a degree hidden under that mop bucket, maybe just stick to the floors, all right?" A couple of others gave the kind of forced chuckles people make when they don't actually find something funny. Michael felt the heat rise in his face. He wasn't used to standing in the middle of a circle like this. He wanted to step back, to fade into the background like he always had, but the rattle inside the machine wouldn't let him. He took a small step forward, his voice firmer this time. "I've worked around systems like this. It's not the compressor, it's the airflow. Something's blocked where no one's looking. You keep replacing parts, you'll keep wasting money." The tall manager's smile disappeared. "That's enough." His tone carried finality, like the closing of a door. Michael's chest tightened, but he held his ground. He thought of his son again, how the boy had fallen asleep on the couch last night, clutching a toy truck, trusting that his dad would somehow keep the world steady. That memory gave him strength. What Michael didn't know was that a few feet away, near the end of the aisle, someone else had stopped to listen. A woman in a dark coat, sharp eyes watching from the shadows, taking in every word he said. The managers went back to their hushed arguments, brushing him off as though he had never spoken. Michael felt the sting of it, the way a man feels when he's reminded of where people think his place should be. Still, he didn't move. He stood with his hands resting on the mop handle, eyes fixed on the humming unit, as if it were a puzzle only he could hear whispering its secret. The rattle grew louder, uneven, almost desperate. Michael took a step closer. He crouched down, tilting his head toward the lower vent, and for a moment the noise lined up in his mind like pieces of a memory. He had heard this before, back when he and his wife were young, living in a small rental with a heater that barely worked through the winter. He had opened the panel one night and found the problem tucked away where no repairman had bothered to look. He swallowed hard. The memory still carried the warmth of her voice, the way she teased him for always tinkering until things came back to life. That same stubborn determination stirred now. Michael rose slowly, his voice steady but quieter this time, almost as though he was speaking more to himself than the room. "You've been looking in the wrong place." No one turned. Not one manager cared to listen. They were already drafting emails, checking watches, counting losses that would soon be pinned on someone else. But from down the aisle, the woman in the dark coat hadn't moved. Her arms were folded, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed not on the broken machine, but on the man who refused to stop seeing what others ignored. Michael didn't know it yet, but he wasn't as invisible as he thought. Michael froze, the rag still in his hand. He hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone speak directly to him. Slowly, he turned toward the voice. The woman in the dark coat was standing just a few feet away, her eyes sharp, steady, and impossible to read. "I asked," she repeated, her tone calm but firm, "what exactly do you think you just did?" Michael cleared his throat, shifting his weight. "I cleared a blockage," he said, his voice careful but steady. "Air wasn't moving through the system the way it should, that's why nothing else was working." One of the managers scoffed from across the room. "With all due respect, ma'am, he's the janitor. He's not trained for this equipment." Michael felt the sting of the words, but he didn't back down. He gestured toward the vent where the rattle had finally gone quiet. Sometimes it doesn't take training, sometimes it just takes listening. That sound's been wrong for days. No part replacement was ever going to fix it. The hum of the machine filled the silence, steady now, smooth and even. The woman's gaze never left his face. She didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss him, just stood there studying him as though she was weighing more than the words he had spoken. Michael shifted under the weight of her stare. He hadn't meant to draw attention, he had only meant to fix what was broken. But now, for the first time, it felt like his voice had carried further than he realised. The room was thick with silence after Michael's words. The steady hum of the machine seemed louder than the people staring at him. The tall manager who had mocked him before leaned forward, his voice dripping with disbelief. So let me get this straight. A man with no credentials, no licence, thinks he's solved a problem that professionals couldn't fix in a week. Michael felt the burn of every eye on him. He wanted to shrink back, to grab his mop and disappear, but something inside refused to bend. He stood his ground. I don't think I solved what they couldn't, he said, his tone steady, almost quiet. I just noticed what they missed. When you've spent years fixing things that mattered to your family, you learn to pay attention. Not everything needs a textbook answer. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to look closer. The manager opened his mouth to fire back, but the woman in the dark coat lifted her hand, silencing the room without raising her voice. She stepped closer to Michael, her heels clicking against the concrete, her gaze never leaving his. "What's your name?" she asked. "Michael," he replied, his throat dry. "Michael Carter." She gave the smallest nod, as though the name carried weight now that she'd heard it. "You'll be hearing from me." No explanation, no smile, just that. Then she turned and walked away, her coat swaying with each step. The managers exchanged uncertain looks, whispers trailing behind her departure. But Michael didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, the mop bucket at his side, the hum of the machine behind him. For the first time in years, he realised he wasn't invisible. That night, Michael drove home in his old pickup, the kind with a stubborn heater and a radio that only worked when it wanted to. The road was quiet, lined with bare trees bending in the winter wind. His hands gripped the wheel, but his mind replayed the moment over and over, the sound of the machine settling into a steady hum. The sharp eyes of the woman in the coat, the way she spoke his name as if it carried weight. When he pulled into the small driveway, the porch light flicked on. His son, Noah, pressed his face against the living room window, waving wildly before darting to the door. Michael barely had time to step inside before the boy threw his arms around him. "Did you fix something today, Dad?" Noah asked, his voice full of the kind of trust only a child could hold. Michael laughed softly, scooping him up. "Yeah, buddy, I fixed something." They ate macaroni and cheese at the kitchen table, the kind of dinner Noah loved and Michael could afford. The boy chatted about school, about the drawing he had made for art class, while Michael listened, smiling, his chest full and aching all at once. When Noah proudly held up the picture, two stick figures standing under a blue sky with the words, "My dad is a hero," Michael had to clear his throat before he could answer. "You think so, huh?" he said gently. "I know so," Noah replied, matter of fact, like it was the simplest truth in the world. Later, after tucking Noah into bed and kissing his forehead, Michael sat alone in the quiet living room. The glow from the television flickered against the walls, but he wasn't watching. He was thinking about how life had narrowed down to nights like this. Work, home, bills, the constant pressure of keeping everything together for one small boy who depended on him. And now, after years of being overlooked, someone at that warehouse had finally noticed him. He didn't know what it meant yet, or if it would last, but it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning came early. Michael woke before the sun, the chill of the house pressing against the windows. He made pancakes from a box mix, humming softly while Noah sat at the table colouring, his small legs swinging back and forth. For a little while it felt like any other morning, simple, ordinary. But just as Michael was rinsing the dishes, his phone buzzed on the counter. He frowned. Hardly anyone ever called him this early. He dried his hands and picked it up, expecting maybe a wrong number or a reminder about a bill. "This is Harrison Logistics," a woman's voice said, firm and professional. "Mr. Carter, you've been asked to report to the main office today, 10 o'clock sharp." Michael blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "There must be a mistake. I'm just maintenance." "Not today, sir," the voice replied. "You're on the schedule for a special meeting, conference room B. Don't be late." The call ended before he could ask another question. Michael stood there, the phone still in his hand, his reflection faint in the kitchen window. Noah looked up from his colouring book. "Dad, who was that?" Michael forced a smile. "Work. They want me in a meeting." "A meeting?" Noah's eyes lit up, wide with wonder. "Like the important kind?" Michael let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. "We'll see, buddy. We'll see." He helped Noah pack his backpack for school, kissed the top of his head, and watched him climb onto the bus. Then he went back inside, opened his closet, and stared at the few shirts hanging there. Most were worn thin from years of use. He chose the cleanest one he had, a button-down with faint creases from the thrift store rack, and tucked it into his pants as neatly as he could. When he caught his own reflection in the mirror, he saw a man trying to look the part, but unable to hide the lines of long nights and hard years. Still, there was something steadier in his eyes now, something new. For the first time in a long while, Michael wasn't just walking into another shift. He was walking into the unknown. By the time Michael pulled into the parking lot of the distribution centre, the morning rush was in full swing. Cars lined the rows, people in pressed shirts and polished shoes hurried toward the glass doors, their lanyards swinging as they walked with purpose. Michael shut off his old truck and sat for a moment, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. His palms rested on the steering wheel, steadying himself. Inside, the lobby felt different when you weren't carrying a mop bucket. The polished tile floors seemed to echo louder, the air colder. The receptionist's smile polite but curious when she checked his name against the list. Michael caught the glance she gave his shirt. Clean, but not the kind of pressed white button-downs everyone else wore. "Conference room B," she said, pointing down the hall. "They're expecting you." The words still sounded strange. "They're expecting you." Michael walked slowly, his boots clicking against the floor. Along the way, he passed groups of employees with laptops tucked under their arms. Some of them gave him quick looks, recognition flashing across their faces. "Wasn't that the maintenance guy?" before whispering to one another. He tried to ignore it, but each look pressed heavier on his shoulders. He thought of Noah again, of the boy's wide eyes that morning when he asked if this was an important kind of meeting. That memory steadied him more than anything else could. When he reached the door, he paused. Through the glass panel, he could see a long table filled with managers and supervisors, their papers spread out, their expressions drawn tight with worry. And at the far end, seated with quiet authority, was the woman from the warehouse, the one who had spoken his name like it mattered. Michael took a breath, squared his shoulders, and pushed the door open. Conversations fell silent. Every head turned toward him. For a moment, he felt like a kid walking into the wrong classroom, every eye waiting to see what mistake he'd make first. The woman leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze locked on his. Then she gestured toward an empty seat near the side of the table. "That's your spot," she said simply. Michael swallowed, nodded once, and stepped forward. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew this much. He wasn't invisible anymore. Michael eased into the chair, his hands folded on the table, the hum of conversation around him dimming as the woman at the head spoke. "Yesterday, while others failed, Mr. Carter identified the issue and restored the system. That's why he's here." A low ripple moved through the room. Some faces looked curious, others doubtful. One man in a navy suit leaned forward, his brows knit tight. "With respect," he said, "anyone can get lucky once. We're talking about a system worth millions. Are we really prepared to believe this was more than chance?" A few nods followed. The doubt wasn't hostile yet, but it carried weight. Michael felt his chest tighten, but he lifted his eyes and spoke, voice calm and plain. "I don't blame you for wondering. I'm not here to claim I'm some expert. All I did was pay attention. Sometimes the simplest fix is the one people overlook." Another manager smirked faintly. "So you're saying all the specialists missed something obvious?" Michael shook his head. "I'm saying when you've spent years fixing broken heaters in the middle of winter, or a fridge that keeps dying when your kid needs milk, you learn to listen differently. I didn't beat anyone. I just noticed what the sound was telling me. The room quieted. A few people shifted in their chairs, not convinced but not dismissing him outright either. At the far end, the woman studied him closely, her pen resting idle on the page. She didn't smile, didn't nod, but her silence carried more weight than the manager's doubt. Michael let out a slow breath. He hadn't won them over, but at least, for now, he hadn't been pushed out. The uneasy quiet didn't last long. The tall manager from the warehouse leaned forward, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. "Let's stop pretending. Even if Mr. Carter happened to notice something once, that doesn't make him credible. Our clients won't be impressed if they find out the man behind our fixes is a maintenance worker without so much as a degree. Are we really prepared to risk our reputation on that?" This time the nods were stronger. A few murmurs echoed in agreement. The words hit heavier, as though a line had been drawn. Michael sat still, his fingers tightening around the pencil he held. Part of him wanted to shrink back, to let the silence swallow him. But then he thought of Noah, how his boy had proudly taped that drawing to the fridge, the words written in crayon, "My dad is a hero." Michael straightened, his voice quiet but carrying through the room. "You're right. I don't have the degree. I don't have the suit or the title. What I do have is years of fixing things when no one else could, because I didn't have the luxury of waiting. When your kid is shivering at night and the heater's dead, you don't care about paperwork, you care about getting it to work again. That's what I did here. I didn't guess, I didn't gamble. I listened, I understood, and I fixed it." The tall manager opened his mouth to reply, but Michael didn't stop. "If results only count when they come from someone with a diploma, then we're not measuring results, we're measuring appearances, and appearances won't keep that system running." The room fell silent. A few people looked down at their notes, others shifted uncomfortably. The weight of his words settled heavier than the doubt had moments ago. At the head of the table, the woman finally spoke, her tone calm but decisive. "Clients care about outcomes, and right now, outcomes speak for themselves. Until someone shows me better, I want Michael in this room." The tall manager's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Michael exhaled slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the resistance wasn't over, but for the first time he had pushed back and held his ground. In the days that followed, Michael's name started showing up in places it never had before. His schedule, once filled with mop rotations and repair requests, now included meetings labelled with words he barely understood. For the first time, his company badge opened doors above the warehouse floor. But every step into those new rooms carried a weight. Some people nodded politely, quick and stiff, their smiles fading the moment he passed. Others looked straight through him, as if pretending he wasn't there would undo what had already happened. A few were kind, offering a quiet word of encouragement, but even then their voices carried a caution, like they were afraid of being overheard. Michael noticed it most in the break room. Conversations would hush when he walked in. The laughter that usually filled the air seemed to evaporate. Once, as he poured himself a cup of coffee, he caught the edge of a whisper, "Shortcut, lucky break," followed by the sound of chairs scraping as a group stood to leave. He carried his cup back to the corner table and sat alone. The sting was sharp, but not unfamiliar. He had been overlooked for years. Now he was being resented. Either way, he was still on the outside. That night at home, Noah tugged on his sleeve while he sat at the kitchen table. "Why do you look tired, Dad? Did you fix something big today?" Michael ruffled his son's hair, managing a faint smile. "Trying to," he said, "but sometimes fixing things means dealing with people who don't want you to." Noah frowned, as if that didn't make sense. Then he slid a new drawing across the table. A picture of the two of them standing beside a tall building with the words, "We belong here." Michael's throat tightened. He placed the paper on the fridge with a magnet, standing in silence for a moment. The next morning, when he walked back into the company's glass corridors, he carried that picture folded in his pocket. No matter what whispers followed him, he had a reason to keep walking. The day of the client demo carried a different kind of weight. The building buzzed like a hive, footsteps quicker, voices sharper, every person aware that contracts worth millions were balanced on the next hour. Michael stood near the back of the wide conference hall, headset resting loosely around his neck. He wasn't seated with the executives in their pressed suits, but tucked beside the technical crew, close enough to see every number glowing on the giant screen. His shirt was neatly pressed, though the faint creases told it came from a thrift store rack. In his pocket, folded carefully, was Noah's drawing that read, "We belong here." At the front, the woman spoke with calm confidence, her words steady as she welcomed the clients. The system hummed to life, charts glowing, models spinning, every line of data flowing smooth. For the first few minutes, it looked perfect. Then the warning came. A small yellow light blinked in the corner of the display. The spinning model faltered, hesitated, then stuttered like an old engine about to stall. The technicians scrambled, whispering into their headsets, already preparing a restart. From the front row, the tall manager leaned toward the woman, his voice pitched just loud enough for others to hear. "I told you this would happen. We shouldn't have risked it today." Michael's pulse hammered. He had seen this before, not on a corporate stage, but in late nights fixing stubborn machines at the warehouse, or tinkering with his own broken appliances, because there was no money for replacements. He had taught himself to read manuals left behind in dusty storage rooms, to understand why systems groaned, or why wires overheated. The sound of the stutter, the flicker of the light, it wasn't unfamiliar. He leaned forward, speaking calmly into his mic. "Don't restart. Give me 30 seconds. The technician beside him frowned, ready to protest, but something in Michael's voice stopped him. Michael's fingers moved quickly across the interface, not with the polish of an engineer, but with the confidence of someone who had studied the guts of these systems when no one was watching. He bypassed the auto reset and adjusted the airflow controls, buried in the system's settings, the same issue he had recognized days earlier. The yellow light flickered, then turned green. The model on the screen steadied, spinning smooth as glass. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then came the applause, soft at first, then rising as the clients leaned forward, impressed not by what had almost failed, but by how seamlessly it had recovered. Michael sat back, exhaling hard. He wasn't a man who wrote theories in boardrooms. He was the man who listened when machines whispered their warnings. And this time, that had been enough to save everything. That evening, long after the clients had left and the building had emptied, Michael stepped out onto the rooftop. The city stretched below him, lights scattered across the dark like stars fallen to earth. He leaned against the railing, letting the cool night air wash over him. For the first time in years, his shoulders felt lighter. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He turned to see the woman in the dark coat, her expression softer now, the weight she always carried set down just enough to reveal something almost human. She handed him a paper cup of coffee, steam curling into the air. "You kept us from losing everything today," she said simply. Michael shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It wasn't just me, the team..." She cut him off gently. "The team was ready to restart and hope for the best. You were the one who refused to give up. That's not luck, that's who you are." He stared down at the cup in his hands, the warmth seeping into his fingers. "I never thought I'd belong in a room like that." "You do now," she said. Her voice carried no hesitation, only certainty. "Starting tomorrow, you're not just maintenance, I want you on the development team." The words hit him harder than he expected. He felt his throat tighten, and for a moment he had no reply. All he could picture was Noah, asleep in his small bed at home, dreaming with the faith only a child could hold. Michael imagined telling him in the morning, watching his eyes light up the way only a boy's eyes can, when his dad becomes more than just steady, when he becomes something to look up to. He set the coffee cup on the ledge and extended his hand. She took it without hesitation, her grip firm but warm. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the city breathing around them. And in that quiet, Michael realised something he hadn't dared to believe in a long time. He wasn't invisible anymore, and maybe he never would be again. Lesson? True value isn't measured by titles or degrees, but by the courage to step up, the wisdom to see what others miss, and the persistence to keep going when no one believes in you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and support. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. I'll see you again soon here on Rain Inside.